Looking back now, all those moments, even the difficult ones, led me right here. And I wouldn't change a thing.
The moment the bell above the glass door chimed, an electric silence, heavy and malignant, fell over the entire floor of the Cunningham Print and Supply, a silence you could almost taste, like old toner and fear. My name is Alex, and for 7 years I had been the silent, dutiful architect of this small, fading empire, or more accurately, its janitor. The figure framed in the doorway was a local celebrity of dread, a woman we all knew only as the Vortex. She didn't just enter a room, she sucked the oxygen out of it, leaving behind only the residue of her singular, intense bitterness. The worst part of her arrival, however, wasn't her presence itself, but the immediate theatrical absence of everyone else. This was the ritual. The sound of her expensive, slightly too loud Italian boots on the linoleum meant one thing: abandonment. I was hunched over the industrial-grade Konica, nursing a coffee that had been cold since 9 a.m., when the first subtle movements began. My cousin Jennifer, who technically held the title of senior design consultant, but whose main job function seemed to be avoiding meaningful labor, executed a move she had perfected over years of corporate apathy. She didn't run. Running was too obvious. Instead, she performed a fluid, almost balletic pivot toward the back storage room, whispering loudly into her headset. "Yes, absolutely. The quarterly budget review is urgent. I'll call you back from a quieter line." The budget review was imaginary. The quieter line was the fire escape. Then there was Frank. Frank Morrison, my mother's second husband, the man who had slid into the CEO's chair of the business my father had built. The same Frank who, in the style of the stepfathers in those dramatic YouTube videos, treated me as an inconvenient, costly relic. Frank was a master of the dignified retreat. He didn't use the fire escape. He simply put on his jacket, adjusted the knot of his cheap silk tie, grabbed a set of car keys, and announced, to no one in particular, "Just heading out to meet with a major new supply partner. Critical deal. Back in 2 hours. Alex, handle the walk-in. Handle the walk-in." That was Frank's catchphrase, the verbal equivalent of shoving me under a bus. His instruction was crystal clear, a decree that superseded every internal policy. Give the woman exactly what she wants, immediately, and get her out of the building. The cost is irrelevant. I watched his retreating back, feeling the familiar, burning prickle of indignation that had been accumulating for a decade. Frank's favoritism toward Jennifer was the open wound of the business. She, the real daughter in his eyes, even though they weren't biologically related, they were spiritually bonded by entitlement, was protected, praised, and shielded from anything that resembled actual customer interaction. She was the face of the business. I was the disposable machinery behind the curtain. And now, the Vortex was bearing down on the front counter, her eyes already darting around, searching for the weakest point of contact, which, inevitably, was me. I pulled up my posture, the scent of her specific, acidic perfume, a mix of old patchouli and pure scorn already reaching me. The Vortex wasn't just rude, she was relentlessly, intensely negative. Her conversational topics were a toxic trinity: her seething hatred of society and the modern age, her eternal, venomous feud with her long-suffering roommate, a woman I genuinely pitied, and most disturbingly, her active, frequently voiced desire for harm to come to neighborhood cats. This was not just annoying customer service. This was absorbing a small but powerful dose of emotional radiation every time she visited. My coworkers had exited the building because they understood that sometimes self-preservation meant literally evacuating the premises. Frank and Jennifer had bolted because they knew that any confrontation with the Vortex required time, patience, and a degree of moral fortitude they reserved only for their golf games. So, I was alone, standing there, waiting for the inevitable demands, the unfair accusations, and the impossible deadlines. The vast, empty space of the shop, usually bustling with the hum of large-format printers and the scent of freshly cut paper, felt like an arena. The silence, punctuated only by the screech of her boots, stopping exactly at the service line, was a form of silent judgment, condemning me to face the fury they had so expertly dodged. It was in that moment, seeing the gleeful, almost manic impatience in her eyes, that the thought occurred to me, a cold, clear, calculating whisper born of years of resentment against Frank's cowardice and Karen's cruelty. If I have to be the one to serve her, I will do it on my own terms. The rules of engagement had just changed. The game was mine. The vortex slammed a wrinkled piece of paper onto the counter. "I need return address labels," she declared, her voice a grating, low-frequency sound that seemed designed to vibrate the fillings in your teeth. "Now! And don't give me that waiting list nonsense. Frank promised me priority service." Frank. Always Frank. The promises he made just to make her disappear faster, all of which landed directly on my plate. I took the paper, which contained nothing more than her name, written in a spiky, aggressive cursive. The passive-aggressive warfare had officially begun. The countdown to my moment of subtle, devastating sabotage had started. To truly understand the genesis of the Blondie labels, one must grasp the corrosive nature of the dynamic at Cunningham Print and Supply, a drama far more complex and toxic than any mere customer service interaction. This wasn't just a workplace, it was a mausoleum of my father's ambition, now managed by the man who had replaced him both in my mother's life and in the CEO chair, Frank Morrison. My father, a man of simple, honest integrity, had built this business from a single rented photocopier. He had intended for it to be a legacy of honest labor and community service. After his sudden passing, Frank entered the picture, a man who, in retrospect, possessed the opportunistic charm of a wolf in a borrowed fleece coat. Frank didn't run the business, he leveraged it, turning my father's hard-won stability into his personal slush fund for his own lavish lifestyle and, more importantly, for the endless, baffling demands of his stepdaughter, Jennifer. Jennifer wasn't just my cousin. She was the physical embodiment of Frank's misplaced favoritism and the clearest indicator of his profound disrespect for my father's memory. She was perpetually underqualified and overpaid. Her presence in the senior design consultant role was a cruel joke. She spent more time scrolling through Instagram for inspiration, which usually meant finding expensive items to add to her fantasy shopping cart, than she did actually consulting with clients. When she did interact with a customer, it was always the premium real estate of the clientele, the ones who were polite, wealthy, and had already approved the budget. Frank had created a corporate bubble for her, a sanctuary where the phrase, "customer is always right," only applied if the customer offered free artisanal coffee or wore designer clothes. My place, the position of the dutiful workhorse, was to absorb all the friction, all the chaos, and all the inherent unpleasantness of the job, the exact friction Frank and Jennifer deemed beneath them. This systematic avoidance wasn't accidental, it was a carefully constructed mechanism of emotional labor exploitation. The moment the vortex arrived, Frank's instinctive retreat was not about fear of a difficult customer. It was about protecting Jennifer from having to share the same air. In his twisted family hierarchy, she was the delicate flower, and I was the rugged, expendable landscape architect. I was expected to solve the problem, any problem, without complaint, without extra pay, and certainly without escalating the situation to his attention. His instruction, give the woman exactly what she wants, immediately, and get her out, was the company's unwritten policy for every unpleasant interaction, a policy that served only to reward the worst behavior, the vortexes, and punish the innocent. Party me. And the vortex, in her own vile, intuitive way, understood this dynamic perfectly. She didn't have to see Frank fleeing, she knew he would flee. She knew Jennifer would evaporate. Her rudeness wasn't just her personality, it was a calculated performance of entitlement, reinforced by years of corporate surrender. When she demanded to skip the queue that contained Mrs. Henderson waiting patiently for her funeral pamphlets and Mr. Dubois needing his complex architectural blueprints, she was flexing the power Frank had inadvertently granted her. Her toxicity was a fast pass, a VIP ticket straight to the front of the line, because everyone, from the top down, just wanted the problem to vanish. As she stood there, her eyes narrowed, waiting for me to jump, I felt a deep, profound sense of being used. It was the feeling of watching someone defile your father's legacy, not with grand embezzlement, that came later, as I would discover, but with 1,000 small acts of cowardice and misplaced affection. Jennifer's casual scorn, Frank's deliberate abandonment, it all culminated in this moment, under the grating scrutiny of the vortex. They had pushed me into the arena. They had pushed me down. And as the story from the video promised, they were about to learn that sometimes the nobody knows everything, and that the nobody is about to seize control of the narrative, one small historically loaded address label at a time. The air in the shop was thick with unspoken resentments and the immediate, urgent demands of a woman who didn't even remember her own address. The next phase of this deeply personal, professional, and slightly treasonous conflict was about to begin. The exchange that followed Frank's swift, cowardly exit and Jennifer's soundless escape was a masterpiece of entitlement, a performance that crystallized years of accumulated frustration. The Vortex wasn't just requesting a service. She was issuing a series of contradictory, impossible edicts designed to maximize my stress and minimize her accountability. This was the moment where my compliance-trained brain, the brain that usually sought efficiency and order, snapped and began seeking chaos and retribution. "Return address labels," she repeated, leaning forward until her breath, smelling faintly of old coffee and something vaguely metallic, reached me. "And don't waste my time with those silly little templates you show the new clients. I need something unique, something that says individuality." I maintained my customer service posture, the practiced empty smile glued firmly to my face. "Certainly, ma'am, we have several options for custom designs. Would you prefer a simple text layout or maybe one of our standard icons? We have a lovely rose, a classic oak tree, or perhaps a cheerful little house." She scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound that conveyed utter contempt for every choice I offered. "A cheerful little house? Are you serious? I despise cheerful little houses. I despise cheerfulness in general, and trees are overrated. I want a picture of some dog." I paused. This was the first hurdle. Our internal policy was clear. Custom images required a minimum $25 design fee, primarily to cover the time spent sourcing high-resolution, copyright-free art and ensuring it would render properly on tiny labels. This fee was non-negotiable, a fact Frank insisted upon, except, of course, when he fled the building. "A picture of some dog," I clarified, keeping my voice even. "We can certainly do custom art." "That will incur a small, one-time design fee of $25? "No!" she cut in sharply, her eyes widening in theatrical outrage. "No design fee. That is highway robbery. I'm a loyal customer, and I want it done immediately. I have important correspondence that needs to go out this afternoon. No delays, and no extra charges." This was the first layer of injustice. She demanded premium, bespoke service while actively refusing to pay the standard documented cost. This was exactly the scenario Frank's cowardly policy, "get her out immediately, cost is irrelevant," was designed to facilitate. He would happily eat the $25 loss just to avoid the 5-minute confrontation, thereby validating her belief that rules did not apply to her. I knew if I charged her, she would throw a scene. I knew if I didn't, Frank would retroactively whine about the lost revenue, even though he authorized the loss. Trapped between a demanding customer and a spineless manager, I made my internal decision. The $25 wasn't worth the fight, but she would pay for her attitude in a currency far more valuable than cash. Then came the second, and arguably more baffling demand, the address. "And what is the return address, ma'am?" I asked, pulling up the template software. She frowned, looking genuinely perplexed, as if I had asked for the square root of a philosophical concept. "Oh, I don't recall exactly. It's the one on Maple Street." "You should have it on file." "We do not keep customer addresses on file," a fact I politely explained. "We don't retain personal data for single-use orders, ma'am." "Could you look it up on your phone, perhaps?" "My phone is for important calls," she sniffed. "Not mundane details. Isn't there one of those phone books still around? The big white ones? Check the names under Vortex. It should be there." "They still print those, don't they? This is 2018, everything is digital," she finished, with a flourish of irony so thick it was almost suffocating. "This is 2018. A woman demanding immediate bespoke service, refusing to pay, and asking me to physically consult a relic of the late 90s to find her address. The sheer, overwhelming audacity of the request, coupled with the decade of accumulated resentment toward Frank and Jennifer, who were likely high-fiving each other on the fire escape, acted like a circuit breaker in my brain. My inner compliance officer, tired of following rules imposed by cowards, flipped a switch. The rules were officially null and void. I spent the next agonizing 10 minutes finding her address, not in a mystical phone book, but by cross-referencing her full name, which she grudgingly provided, with public property records on a background tab, all while she tapped her foot, impatiently complaining about the slowness of my system. As the address finally populated the template field, I looked at the placeholder for the custom image. Some dog. The phrase hung in the air, simple, vague, and utterly perfect. She wanted a dog. She was going to get a dog. She wanted individuality. She was going to get historical individuality. She wanted it immediate and free. She was going to get it with a price tag that only her conscience, if she had one, could redeem. The stage was set. The knowledge that Jennifer was probably sipping a latte in the cafe next door, and Frank was likely on the 9th hole of his favorite golf course, both congratulating themselves for successfully dumping this nightmare onto my lap, fueled the final, critical decision. They had pushed me down one time too many. They were about to find out that when you are the sole person left standing in the arena, you are the only one who dictates the final rules of engagement. The moment I typed the meticulously researched address onto the label template, the final crucial element remained. The dog. Some dog. The sheer bland generality of her request was the key. Had she requested a specific breed, a Labrador, a Poodle, a Schnauzer, the act of sabotage would have been messy, obvious, and easily reversible. But some dog was an open invitation to interpretation, a blank check for my deeply frustrated, justice-seeking psyche to deposit the most historically loaded image I could find. I glanced over the counter. The Vortex was now preoccupied with an aggressive, one-sided phone call, presumably venting about a new, egregious transgression committed by her hapless roommate, or perhaps by a particularly defiant neighborhood cat. This provided the crucial 30 seconds of visual distraction I needed. My compliance training taught me the value of documentation and discretion. Today, those skills were repurposed for an act of controlled digital anarchy. I discreetly opened a new browser tab. My fingers, accustomed to typing complex compliance codes and financial disclaimers, moved with the swift, practiced efficiency of a seasoned hacker. I could have searched for an ugly dog, a goofy dog, or even a picture of a dog clearly suffering from bad fashion choices. But that would have been amateur, petty revenge. My act had to be subtle, lasting, and deeply meaningful, a symbolic rejection of her entire misanthropic worldview, enacted through a single tiny image. I thought about her venomous hatred of cheerfulness, her contempt for society, and her casual cruelty. What animal best symbolized the absolute antithesis of everything normal, happy, and wholesome? The answer was immediate, cold, and brilliant in its historical darkness. I typed 2 words, Hitler's dog. The search results instantly provided the perfect candidate. Not a grainy, low-quality image, but a stark, black-and-white photograph of Blondie, Adolf Hitler's German Shepherd. Blondie was perfect. She was a serious dog, a historically notorious dog, the very pet of a figure who embodied the hatred of humanity that the Vortex seemed to champion. It was the absolute maximum level of historical and moral offense that could be smuggled onto a 1-inch return address label. The image itself was discreet. It wasn't a propaganda poster or a notorious portrait. It was simply a photograph of a large, stoic German shepherd. A some dog to the untrained eye, but an arsenal to anyone with even a passing knowledge of 20th century history. I quickly downloaded the image file, renamed it Custom Dog Icon Approved Vortex, and imported it into the label software. This careful naming process was the ingrained, ironic residue of my job. Even in an act of petty treason, I retained perfect professional documentation. The label template, which had only moments ago felt like a cage designed by Frank, suddenly felt like a canvas for a masterpiece. I manipulated the image. I didn't place Blondie front and center. That would be too loud, too easy for the Vortex to spot during her cursory inspection. Instead, I reduced the image size to an inconspicuous 8-point icon, positioning it precisely in the lower right corner, exactly where one of our standard innocuous clip art icons, like the rose or the cheerful house, would normally reside. It was small enough to look like a generic black silhouette of a dog, but clear enough, upon close inspection, to be undeniably Blondie. The final visual composition was sublime. Her actual name and address, the mundane, everyday reality, were paired with the subtle, insidious presence of historical evil, the symbolic judgment. It was a quiet digital rebellion against her tyranny, a secret language spoken only between me, the printer, and the history books. I looked up. The Vortex had finished her tirade and was tapping her fingers on the counter, demanding to know why the process was taking so long. "I need this done immediately," she hissed, using the word like a weapon. "Just confirming the custom image, ma'am," I replied smoothly, my face a mask of neutral professionalism. "A beautiful German shepherd, ready to print now." She waved a dismissive hand. Fine, whatever. "Just print the damn things." She didn't look at the screen. She didn't scrutinize the proof. She simply commanded, demanded, and expected compliance. Her lack of attention, her entitlement, her certainty that I was nothing more than a mindless servant, was the final, fatal ingredient in her undoing. The print command was executed. The faint whirring of the industrial label printer began, sounding to my ears like the quiet march of historical justice. The whirring of the label machine, usually a monotonous background drone, now sounded like the focused, determined rhythm of a small personal revolution. I stood over the printer, watching the continuous sheet of high-quality adhesive-backed paper feed through, each tiny label spitting out at a furious pace. There were precisely 500 of them, neatly lined up in 5 columns of 100 rows. On each label, a clean, bold, black address, the Vortex's name and street, meticulously retrieved from public records, and in the lower right corner of every single one, the 8-point black and white silhouette of Blondie. It was a study in controlled chaos. The image was small enough to be easily mistaken for a standard, generic dog icon, perhaps a stock image from a clip art library designed to denote pet-friendly or dog lover. But the moment your eye truly focused, when the light hit the texture of the matte finish just right, the undeniable historical weight of the image became clear. It was a German shepherd, positioned in a specific, almost regal stance, its lineage tragically famous. My revenge was not loud, it was viral and insidious. The labels were destined to be affixed to 500 pieces of correspondence, sent out into the world, silently judging her character while adhering to the most mundane postal standards. Every utility bill, every angry letter to her roommate, every piece of misanthropic hate mail, all of it would now carry this tiny, perfect, historically dark signet. The irony was not lost on me. The Vortex had specifically requested this service to save herself the negligible cost of a design fee and the minor inconvenience of finding her own address. By demanding maximum speed and minimum cost, she had inadvertently signed a contract for maximum symbolic value. She had paid nothing extra for the most historically significant pet image in the Western world. The machine's output tray quickly filled with the freshly printed labels. The warm, slightly metallic scent of the thermal transfer ink filled the air. My movements were precise. I gently separated the 500 labels into manageable sheets and, using our professional-grade cutting board, began trimming the excess paper, the sound of the blade slicing through the stock providing a clean, satisfying snip with every pass, a ceremonial sound of completion. The Vortex, momentarily finished with her phone conversation, slammed the phone down onto the counter, making a sound that caused me to flinch slightly, a movement she misinterpreted as subservience. "Well, are they done yet?" "This has taken an eternity. I could have driven to the city and had them printed faster." "They are completed, ma'am," I said, sliding the perfectly trimmed, neatly stacked labels across the counter. The full package, bundled with a rubber band, looked utterly professional, utterly innocuous. She didn't examine them. She didn't even pick up the top sheet to check the quality, the font, or, most importantly, the icon she had so vaguely requested. Her entitlement had blinded her. She assumed the result would be exactly what she deserved, perfection, delivered instantaneously without effort on her part. She merely opened her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and slapped it down, leaving me with the realization that not only had she successfully dodged the $25 design fee, but she had also shorted me on the base printing cost. "Keep the change," she snarled, a phrase that was not a gesture of generosity but a dismissal. She scooped up the packet of labels, and without a single glance back, stormed out the door, the bell chiming its sad, familiar song of her departure. The silence she left behind was no longer heavy with dread. It was now light with the exhilarating, secret knowledge of the revenge that was already in motion. Only minutes later, after I had returned the small payment tray to the till, Frank would notice the discrepancy later, another minor headache for him to deal with, the door swung open again. Frank and Jennifer returned almost simultaneously, entering with the feigned casualness of people who hadn't just sprinted around the block to avoid a customer. "Crisis averted, Alex?" "Excellent work," Frank said, trying to sound like a commanding officer rather than a deserter. He quickly scanned the counter to ensure no lingering evidence of conflict remained. "She's gone, then? Good. Now about that payment." I handed him the $20 bill. "She left $20, Frank. The total for the labels was $30. She refused the $25 design fee and shorted us $10 on the print job." Frank's face contorted, not in anger at the vortex, but in frustrated annoyance at the administrative inconvenience. "Damn it. See, Alex, this is why we just get rid of them. A clean loss is better than a long negotiation." He carefully pocketed the $10 of the loss himself, a minor embezzlement in the endless stream of his fiscal abuses. Still, better than a scene. "You handled it. Jennifer, did you get that quarterly budget finalized?" He turned his attention to his favorite, neglecting the fact that I had just weathered a psychic storm for them both. Jennifer, blissfully unaware and sipping a fresh latte, offered me a patronizing look. "Oh, the vortex was here? Tough break, cuz. Anyway, Alex, did you remember to stock the low-fat creamer? Frank needs it for his morning Americano tomorrow." That was the final sting. My decade of absorbing their neglect, my moment of personal heroism against a mutual enemy, was immediately reduced to the level of stocking dairy products. They were utterly blind, completely self-absorbed. As I watched them retreat to their respective positions, Frank to his private phone calls, Jennifer to her social media, consulting, I felt no anger, only a cold sense of triumph. They had pushed me out of the family circle, forcing me to operate in the shadows. And in the shadows, I had found a tool they couldn't see, couldn't trace, and couldn't undo. The 500 labels, now carried away by the vortex, were 500 tiny missiles launched at the collective smugness of Frank, Jennifer, and the entire toxic system they represented. The repercussions would be tiny, subtle, but enduring. The days and weeks that followed the Blondie incident were outwardly unremarkable, yet beneath the surface of the Cunningham print and supply shop, a subtle shift in the moral atmosphere had occurred. For Frank and Jennifer, life returned to its predictable cycle of self-interest and delegated drudgery. Frank worried about quarterly reports and the looming threat of the bank reviewing the company's generous line of credit, generous thanks to the valuation my father had established. Jennifer worried about her Instagram feed and whether her latest inspirational post had garnered enough likes to justify her inflated salary. They were islands of self-absorption, completely insulated from the quiet storm I had unleashed. My role remained unchanged. I was the reliable utility player, fixing the paper jams, managing the industrial-sized guillotine cutter, and absorbing the stress that they meticulously avoided. But now, my compliance-trained mind, usually focused on ensuring legal adherence, was dedicated to tracking the invisible fallout of the Blondie labels. My revenge was designed to be silent, cumulative, and persistent, a series of tiny paper cuts rather than one fatal blow. The true beauty of the Blondie sabotage lay in its permanence and ubiquity. The vortex was not a person who sent 3 letters a year. She was a prolific correspondent, fueled by her endless grievances. Every piece of mail she sent, from passive-aggressive notes to the management of her apartment building regarding noise, to viciously worded complaints to the local council about the state of the sidewalks, to the monthly utility bills, was now legally obligated to carry the tiny 8-point icon of the German Shepherd. 500 labels meant 500 silent judgments, 500 tiny seeds of historical irony sown into the mundane postal system of our small downtown community. I imagined the journey of those labels. A low-level clerk at the electric company processing thousands of payment envelopes might momentarily pause. Huh, that's a serious-looking dog. Looks almost official. A mail carrier, recognizing the distinctive, aggressive scrawl of the Vortex's handwriting, might notice the sharp, unusual icon. The labels, designed to be inconspicuous, relied on a principle Frank and Jennifer never understood. Discretion is the most powerful form of attention. The first and most satisfying observation was purely psychological. The Vortex had to physically affix Blondie to her envelopes. Every time she sealed a letter with her venomous opinions about the state of the world, she was simultaneously endorsing the darkest corners of history with a quiet, adhesive conviction. The act of using the labels, which she was forced to do because she was too cheap to throw them away, was a continued, self-inflicted punishment. Her demand for some dog had been answered with the dog, a constant, silent companion to her misery. I monitored her future visits with an air of clinical detachment. She returned to the shop 3 months later, demanding a poster print, a giant, garish canvas depicting her interpretation of the ugliness of modern society. Frank and Jennifer instantly fled. I served her again, professionally, quickly, ensuring she was out in under 7 minutes. She didn't mention the address labels. She didn't complain about the icon. In her self-centered universe, the labels were perfect because she had commanded them, and her brain simply registered them as dog label. The subtle, historical context was entirely lost on her, which only amplified my satisfaction. The revenge was working precisely because she was too arrogant to notice the damage. The real target, however, was the systemic blindness of Frank and Jennifer. They believed they had eliminated the problem by giving the Vortex what she wanted. They never saw the true cost of their cowardice. They never understood that by abandoning me to the chaos, they gave me the freedom to rewrite the rules. Frank's constant lament about the lost $10 and the skipped $25 design fee was a recurring, low-frequency hum of annoyance, but he never realized that I had saved the company something far more precious than money: my self-respect, packaged neatly on a roll of 500 stickers. This quiet aftermath was my victory lap. I was the only person in that building who knew that 500 pieces of historical irony were flowing through the local postal stream, each one a tiny physical record of the day Frank and Jennifer abandoned me to the wolves. They were still basking in the glow of their escape, unaware that the real, lasting consequence was affixed to the back of every envelope leaving Maple Street. The long game had begun. The true weight of the Blondie labels was not felt in the immediate moment, but in the long, drawn-out psychological certainty of the act. Frank and Jennifer, steeped in their self-serving delusion, believed that problems only existed if they were loud, financial, or personally inconvenient. The issue with the Vortex was resolved, to them, because she was physically absent, and no major confrontation had occurred. They failed to grasp the enduring power of subtlety, a power I, the silent compliance officer and print technician, understood intimately. They measured success by avoidance. I measured success by persistence. My compliance background taught me that the most devastating frauds are not the massive, one-time thefts, but the small, undetectable discrepancies that accumulate over years. The Blondie labels were my equivalent of that slow, insidious fraud, a moral embezzlement against the entitlement of the Vortex and the cowardice of my family. I would often catch myself ruminating on the labels, picturing their journey. I imagined a mundane domestic scene, the Vortex in her messy apartment, finally getting around to sending a furious notice to the city about a perceived injustice. She rips a label off the sheet, licks the adhesive, or peels the backing, depending on the stock, and affixes it to the top left of the envelope. It's an act performed without thought, a mechanical chore. Yet, with every label, she is reaffirming my judgment of her. Her refusal to pay for a simple service, her demand for immediate gratification, and her absolute disregard for the common decency of others were now forever sealed, 500 times over, with a token of historical disgrace. The true revenge lay in the fact that the Vortex would never know. She would live out her miserable life sending letters adorned with Blondie, and the context would remain solely mine. This was my hidden victory, my secret language. Frank and Jennifer, meanwhile, were too busy perpetuating their internal drama to notice the moral rot they allowed to fester. Jennifer was still delegating her work to me, still finding excuses for extended lunches, blissfully ignorant of the fact that the entire foundation of their preferential system was built on my suppressed resentment. Frank was still playing the patriarch, demanding obedience while refusing to engage in any form of unpleasant confrontation. Their blind spot was my operational theater. This persistent, quiet act was essential for my own sanity. It allowed me to continue enduring the systemic abuses of my workplace. Whenever Frank would sigh dramatically about his heavy workload, or Jennifer would complain about her creative burnout, I would simply think of the 500 tiny German shepherds circulating in the municipal mail system. It was my private internal laugh track, a reassurance that I wasn't just a victim of their convenience. I was the subtle, invisible hand of justice in their complacent little world. The Blondie label became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the Cunningham print and supply business, and everything that was wrong with the Vortex's view of the world. It encapsulated the moment where an ordinary transaction was twisted by extraordinary rudeness, and where a professional was pushed so far that the only recourse was an act of profound, yet perfectly concealed insubordination. They forced me to operate outside the system. I simply used the tools of the system to deliver a consequence they would never be able to trace back to me. The enduring image of Blondie, small and stoic, carried a weight that Frank's profit-loss statements could never quantify. It was a constant reminder that when you abandon decency, when you prioritize cowardice over basic respect, you open the door for unforeseen and long-lasting consequences. And those consequences, in my hands, were delivered with the meticulous, professional precision of the very employee they deemed disposable. 8 years have passed since the day the Vortex demanded some dog, and Frank and Jennifer chose flight over duty. 8 years of distance and different employment have given me the clarity to analyze that moment, not as a fit of petty rage, but as a critical act of self-restoration. A moment where the balance, violently disrupted by managerial cowardice and customer cruelty, was meticulously restored by the disposable employee. The lessons learned that day were enduring. Frank and Jennifer eventually faced the natural consequences of their incompetence and self-serving policies. The business, starved of ethical leadership and choked by Frank's minor embezzlements, began its slow, inevitable decline, forcing my mother to finally take control and ultimately sell. They didn't fall because of the Blondie labels, but the labels were a crucial, silent harbinger of their moral bankruptcy. They thought their avoidance was strength. I knew it was their fatal flaw. The fate of the Vortex and her historically charged correspondence remains a source of quiet, enduring satisfaction. She likely finished all 500 labels within a few years, each one a tiny act of public self-indictment. I often think of the cumulative effect: 500 pieces of mail sent to 500 different entities, local government, utility companies, friends, enemies, each bearing that subtle, powerful image. Did anyone ever truly notice? Did a history buff at the municipal archives ever hold her envelope under a magnifying glass, recognize the icon, and experience a brief, jarring moment of confusion? I hope so. I hope that, somewhere, someone saw it and wondered about the type of person who would choose to affix the pet of a genocidal dictator to their everyday mail. The irony is the ultimate victory. The Vortex, who hated society, was unwittingly performing a profound social critique on every envelope. The woman who sought to be unique and pay nothing received a bespoke piece of art carrying a priceless, terrible legacy. She believed she got away with cheapness and rudeness. I know that she paid the highest possible symbolic price. In the famous words of the dramatic video that shaped this narrative, "Justice isn't revenge, it's balance. Restore the balance." My act was not about getting revenge on the Vortex. She was merely a tool of the system. It was about restoring the balance of the workplace, pushing back against Frank's and Jennifer's comfortable betrayal. They had pushed me into the arena alone. I left them a monument to their cowardice. Even now, 8 years later, the Blondie labels serve as a perfect metaphor. They represent the quiet power of the marginalized employee, the person who knows the system intimately and is pushed to the point of ingenious, non-violent rebellion. They are a testament to the fact that when you force a person trained in compliance to operate outside the rules, they will use their precision and knowledge to deliver consequences far more lasting and subtle than any screaming match could achieve. The lesson for the Vortex, Frank and Jennifer, remains the same. Be careful who you push down. They might just have the skills, the opportunity, and the cold-blooded determination to weaponize a common office supply item and turn your everyday mail into a symbol of historical irony and eternal quiet shame.